Martin Sommer, let's look at one aspect of the problem first with you, the impact on food security for people. I mean, if you take Africa, for instance, we see that food emergencies there have almost tripled since the 1980s. Is that because of drought and desertification?
Climate change for me is perhaps the single most important factor today, which is threatening food security. It is not the way how people treat the land or work the land. They know very well how to make best advantage out of difficult conditions. But it is the fact that, and there I have to blame the northern countries, who are responsible for 3/4 of the carbon output in the last 50 years, and that in turn was the trigger for global warming. 4 or 5 years, the relative growth of food in the world is behind the growth of population and demand for food. The food stocks, which have been 10 years ago around 110 days worldwide, are down to 53 or 55. This is alarming. We see the first signs of food shortages worldwide, and we have to make a link to the desertification process.
You say food shortages worldwide, but I mean, essentially, if a country, a government is rich enough to import food that it can't produce for itself, Fatima Jibrell, then it's not a problem. I mean, Egypt, because it doesn't have enough water, has to import half of its food. But starvation occurs when governments don't do that.
Well, I would like to say that Egypt's economy is sustained by aid, mostly. And, you know, if the khubz price rises, there would be governance crisis in Egypt. However, these systems are probably the most sophisticated populations, educated populations in Africa. You come back to countries where neither government is strong enough to attract aid for their people, or you come back to systems like pastoral communities that have no idea of how food is traded in the world. And all they know is to sell livestock and to eat meat and drink milk.
Let me put the question, I mean, to you. Essentially, it's this. I mean, for instance, a recent study by the British Meteorological Office says that extreme drought could really affect a lot of the world, that perhaps a third of agriculture that we need, a third of the production, is going to be impossible.
We certainly know that what Camilla Tulmin from the International Institute of Environment and Development just put forward the question on the trade issue. We know that trade, local trade, and trade into urban centers could be of crucial importance to farmers, market access, market information. So we would move forward in taking a look really not only at the practices on the ground, but really looking at what Ibrahim has raised, namely the policies surrounding agricultural production and pastoralism, meaning the policies in trade, monetary policies, and so on and so forth, that could establish an enabling environment for farmers.
Now, if you're really talking about dealing with deserts, you're really talking about, therefore, rethinking a lot of things that we've taken for granted, rethinking diets, rethinking in India, for instance, just to give you one of the things that I would push our government to do is to say that instead of just buying wheat and rice from our farmers, buy coarse millets or the most nutritious millets also as part of the food procurement systems, so that you give incentive to those lands. There are ways to move ahead, but you have to look at the deserts not as, in some senses, we have over the last 30 years, as poor lands.
In the Sahelian countries, most of the government are promoting rice production. Importing rice from Asia is much cheaper than producing it locally. Okay, and they keep saying that we want to have self-sufficiency in agriculture. Yes, self-sufficiency, yes, but with pastoralism, not with agriculture.
So what are you saying? Stop people eating rice?
No. Well, stop producing rice locally. If you want to eat rice, import it from elsewhere, which is cheap, and produce other things. And there are a number of research centers that have now developed what they call aridiculture.
So change people's eating habits, as Martin Sommer said at the beginning.
Knowledge, value
people
How
have
are you
changed.
going to stop people eating rice in India, for instance, Sunita and Narain? I mean, it's the staple diet there, isn't it?
Very clearly. Start pricing rice as it should be priced, which is the value of water in it. People will start changing rice diets to say we will also eat other food which is equally nutritious.
Eat chapatis with your food and other things.
We do eat chapatis with our food, just by the way.
I know you do, but you're saying more chapatis and less rice.
No, I am saying that look at the deserts and look at them in terms of how we have changed things to... Well,
but aren't you glorifying all this in a way? Because Ibrahim Thiaw, you yourself come from a family who we can call eco-refugees. There was a problem, there was conflict in Mauritania, where your family come from, over depleted resources.
Yeah, that's right. And these conflicts, unfortunately, they will be occurring more regularly.
What happened in your instance then?
In my instance, it was a conflict over farmers and pastoralists between two countries, Mauritania and Senegal, and that led to an international crisis and led to people having to leave their countries. In the case of Mauritania, it was the government of Mauritania itself who decided that some people should be moving to Senegal and Mali. But the bottom line is that this conflict was created by a small conflict between two people, and it led to an international crisis. So the conflicts over access to natural resources will be huge in the future, because the population keeps growing and natural resources are being depleted and depleted and depleted again.
I mean,
so there's no land for...
The United Nations, do you all accept what the United Nations says, which is there are twice as many refugees from ecological destruction as there are from armed conflict? You all think that sounds broadly right, do you?
We know that there are direct links between environmental degradation and migration. I think we have enough indications for that. And we know that the debate, for example, we just had on rice and the question of eating habits is for many, many farmers, particularly in Africa, is not an issue. It's more an issue of survival on very, very scarce resources. And many of them, the only alternative to the subsistence production that they have is actually migration. So, whatever you term it, environmental migrants or migration because of environment.
And what are the figures you're talking about? We've heard of a UN figure of about 65 million people leaving sub-Saharan Africa, North Africa, and coming to Europe because of environmental degradation, eco-refugees.
There are more people that are migrating within Africa that are not accounted for. So the problem is much larger than that. Take the example of Africa, because you are naming it, and Europe is now much concerned, quite rightly, about migration that is coming. If you look at the origin of these people, it is essentially from arid lands and semi-arid lands. They are all coming from the Sahel, they are coming from the Horn of Africa, because they cannot survive there. But more than that number is actually migrating within Africa. Let me give you the example of West Africa. You have at least 3 million people from Burkina Faso living in Côte d'Ivoire. Okay, you have another 2 million probably from Mali living again in Côte d'Ivoire. And these movements have been there all the time. Now that Côte d'Ivoire itself is in conflict, they have to go elsewhere. So it's a much complex issue. I'm not saying that Côte d'Ivoire is as affected by desertification as others, but there's a political problem in Côte d'Ivoire, so people cannot move anymore within Africa, and they have to go outside.